Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about class methods. As we saw in our previous example, that we can change a class attribute from within, this is a class attribute, from within an instance method. Now, that works and that's fine. That happens on various occasions. However, there is a more preferred way to access class attributes by using what's called class methods. Like class attributes should be accessed by class methods. That should make a whole lot of sense. So let's look at what a class method is. I'm going to type it up here. So we want to write a class method that increments the number of cards, the class attribute. So I'm going to start with this funny add class method. So let me just finish writing it. Increment number of cars, and then see what it auto completes for me is something, a CLS, and then that's actually the class, and from the class I can get number of cars, and I'll increment that. Okay, so let's take a moment to go through this line by line to see what it actually is. So number of cars, again, is a class attribute. Now, what a class method, what a class method is, it operates on the class, right? Not any particular instance of the class. It operates on the class. Now, it is just a method, just like instance method. However, this method is prefaced with a class method decorator. So this is called a decorator. Okay, so what decorators are, they modify the behavior of class and functions and methods and etc. Okay, it's a fairly advanced topic, but for now, let's just remember, in order to define a class method, we have to use add class method decorator. It's just the syntax. The first parameter of a class method is the class, just like the first parameter of an instance method is the instance. So yeah, for class method, it's the class itself. And by convention, it is named CLS, kind of short for class. Although just like the self parameter of an instance method, it can be really any legal identifier. But let's all use CLS so as not to confuse other people or ourselves. And the way it works is that CLS is bound to the class in which the class method is defined. So because we define this class method inside the car class, so CLS is in most cases automatically assign the car class. Okay, so because CLS is the car class, CLS dot number of cars would then refer to the class attributes of the class car. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, in order to call it, okay, so I haven't done anything after I define this class. In order to use it, and I'm going to use it in an instance method, our initializer. In order to use it, I can say, because it's a class method, I'll start with the class and then say increment the number of cars. So let me just make sure when I run this, it still works. Yes, number of cars is 2. Just to dig into a little more detail, so the class method can be invoked by dereferencing the class that is defined in. And then when we call it, note that we don't need to put a parameter here, or we don't need to put an argument here, because Python automatically put the class car in this CLS parameter. Okay, so this is just very much like calling instance methods, that we do the instance dot that instance method, and we don't have to put the instance explicitly as the first parameter of the instance method, even though self is always there for all instance methods. So this pretty much works the same way, but just as for class methods. So this is one way to call class method using the name of the class. Another way is we can actually use self to call a class method that's defined for the class of the instance. Okay, and I actually think this is the preferred way to do it. So let me just run it. It still works. We still have two cars. Okay, and the way it works, as I just shown, it can be invoked by the reference and instance of the class. Okay, the way it works is kind of similar to accessing a class attribute through an instance, right? So Python, it would first look up the method in the instance. If it finds it, you use it, and we're all good. Now, if it doesn't find a particular method in the instance, it will look for it in the class, right? And in this case, the class of self is capital car, and then capital car, the class car has this method called increment number of cars. So that's how it's able to invoke a class method through an instance. Hopefully that all makes sense, and here's a little exercise for you. You should write a class method, get number of cars, because okay, remember what we actually did here. We access the class attribute directly by accessing the attribute itself, which is never desirable. We should write a getter, right? So we're going to write a getter for the class attribute. So we're going to call this get number of cars, and it should just return the class attribute number of cars. Okay, instantiate a few car instances, call it from the client code, and make sure that it returns the right number for you. Okay, so pause the video, go ahead and write this class method. All right, assuming you have done that, it's important enough that I think I'll just also write it so that we're on the same page. So again, to write a class method, I'm going to start with class method. I'm going to define get number of cars. I'm given the class as a parameter, and I'm just going to return it, number of cars. And instead of accessing the attribute directly, I can call the get number of cars. All right, so let's make sure it still works. Yes, it still works. Okay. And yes, well, one way to know, I mean, you should already know this. From outside the class, if you want to invoke a class method, you just use the name of the class. Because I mean, you can invoke it through an instance of the class, but oftentimes, we may not even have an instance, right? And also, because this information really is, again, it doesn't belong to any particular instance, so it's also makes more sense to invoke it through the class itself. Okay, so that's so much about class methods. Oh wait, one more thing. Now, class methods. Can class we saw here that from within an instance method we can call class methods, right? How about the other way around? Can class method access instance attributes, or can they call instance methods? So think for a moment. Can they do that? Well, no, they cannot. And the reason, I hope it's obvious, that because class method is given a class as a parameter, right? Not any particular instance. But in order to access instance attributes or call instance methods, we need an instance, right? But because class method is not given an instance, we really cannot access the instance attributes or call instance methods.